The journey is conversations with ordinary people about stories of transformation and how we may have had setbacks in our life and how we persevered through those, how we've learned from those obstacles, and how they've maybe helped us on our path today. Well, Lori Aamodt, welcome to the journey, and I'm glad to have you here. I know we just met each other in the last couple years, actually through the gym, and just seeing each other at the gym, and then striking up a conversation. I think we were both on the stationary bike at one time. So, well, welcome to the journey, and let me just share a little bit about what the journey is. The journey is really a show that just brings on ordinary people talking about their stories. How they may have recreated themselves through over time, either as their career has changed over time, maybe if they've struggled with some type of setback, either through a mental illness or through an addiction or some type of trauma in their life, or it may just been just through life itself, that following what that passion was and how that may have changed into something else throughout their life. So that's basically what the journey is. How did someone recreate themselves? How did someone fail forward? So well, welcome to the journey. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, not a problem. And so tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do. But as you're kind of going to that, what do you do for fun? What does Lori do for fun?
Oh, what do I do for fun? Well, I love to travel. Okay. And I love to exercise, and I really love football.
Okay, nice, very nice.
So okay. My dad made me love the Bears. He told me about the players on and off the field, and he made me love the game.
Okay, all right. When do you remember? Did your dad bring you to games, or was it more watching TV?
It was more on TV. I maybe saw one. Okay. But now I kind of love college football because my son went to Alabama. So, but I love all football.
Okay. Nice. So I grew up with my dad was a Packers fan, and because of when I was born, the Packers were world champions and then Super Bowl champions and stuff, and he graduated from high school in Wisconsin, and so did my mom, and then over time when I was playing for all those years and coaching, I played, but I didn't necessarily follow a particular team or anything. And then, as I've told the story before, is that Caleb and I ended up following a particular running back for NIU, who then went on to the Bears. And then since that time period, we followed probably more the Bears. But I realized, probably watching college football, is that I just enjoy good competition.
Yes.
We were, Caleb and I were home on Saturday night, and it was funny. We were flipping through in the fourth quarter, flipping through the games in the fourth quarter, just what scores were closest, what potential upset was going to happen, just being able to watch the competitiveness.
Yes. And last Saturday was a lot of good games.
There was a lot of good games. And Alabama's definitely it's a fun team to be.
As a coach myself, I love watching some of the things that Nick Saban does, and he's an incredible motivator. Yeah. And you can't help but notice that.
So going there. So when you think of observing Nick Saban and some of his coaching and some of his coaching philosophy, anything particular stand out that stood out to you, resonated with you, or maybe even you then adapted that for what you coach?
Well, I love listening to him and how his expectations for his players is so high. And I'm trying to think of one thing. I mean, his will to win is incredible. And I don't know that I can narrow it down to one thing, but I just really pay attention to him. I don't know. He just has a very high expectation.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that's kind of stood out to me with his work is that he has a high expectation of win. He puts big goals out there, but then he also very much focuses on the small things. Yes. And even though the expectation is the big goal, it's really about living in the process, living in and talking about teaching the small things, and if you focus on your assignment,
yes.
and the person next to you focuses on their assignment, we're going to be okay.
Yes.
And where the breakdown happens is where someone or the group as a whole are not focusing on just what they can do. And,
yes.
and so I think it's that tension between having high expectation, but not everything is in the outcome. It's
yes.
about in the process. And
yes, very much so.
we'll probably come back to that sometime
Yes,
as
we
we
will.
talk. As we talk. So Lori, are you from the Rockford area?
Yes, I was born and raised in Rockford.
Okay, all right. And so mom and dad, right? And how many siblings?
I have one sister.
One sister,
Yes.
older, younger?
Younger.
Younger, okay. And what high school did you go to?
Guilford.
Guilford, okay. And so, and you got involved with the gymnastics, right? That was
Since I was very young. I was that kid that could not sit still. You know, I had to be upside down and all over the place and walking across the top of the swing set. And I think my mom went, I better get her some instruction before she hurts herself.
Okay. And so I can just imagine you are your mom's oldest, your mom and dad's
Yes.
oldest, and you're walking across the top of the...
That is what she told me I did, and I was very young.
Yeah. So any idea of approximately how old you were when...
Well, she told me I was 2 or 3.
Oh, goodness.
Yes.
All right. So just the idea that you even were climbing up
Yes.
that. So then gymnastics. Why gymnastics?
You know, I don't know why she put me there.
Okay.
But it was a total match.
Okay.
I mean, I haven't looked back since. I think I've been in the gym since I was 6 or 7 years old.
Okay.
And it's been my world. I love it.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so when you first got involved with gymnastics, I mean, I know you were little, right? And it was
Yes.
but what do you, because there's going to be a lot of parents listening, and maybe even more parents than, grade school age kids listening. So what was it about this particular activity that seemed different than other things that your mom and dad might have introduced you
Well,
to?
I would say I didn't really know anything else, but I had a really hard time learning my flip-flop. You know, anybody that does gymnastics or cheerleading, I mean, that's the big skill you have to get right away.
Right.
And I had a really hard time getting it.
Okay.
And nobody gave up on me. You know, my teammates and my mom was my coach.
Okay.
Eventually, anyway. And after I learned that one skill, I took off.
Okay.
So I just think it's amazing that everybody stuck with me, and that I just kept going and going until, by the time I was 9, I went to the World Age Group Championships in London.
Oh, really?
And so after that, I took off, but it was just that one thing, that I think stops people sometimes from continuing, and it's so worth it.
Sure.
So,
and I know this is hard to remember because it was, you were 6, right? But or 6 or 7. But what do you think, looking back on learning that particular stunt, learning that particular move, what do you think was in the way until you experientially you got it?
I was afraid. I was just afraid. I don't know if I was afraid of falling on my head, I guess, because you're jumping backwards onto your hands. And I just wanted somebody to stand there, and just make sure that I'm safe. I was careful, I guess, on that one thing, which is crazy from the kid that walked across the top of the swing set. I don't know what happened, but it was just a foreign move, I guess.
Okay.
And then once I got beyond that, I never looked back.
Sure.
But I think a lot of people might just change sports thinking it's not their sport, but that never occurred to me.
Yeah.
Like this is what I wanted to do.
Sure. And again, this idea of being so young, and this is what I want to do, or this is where I felt comfortable, or at home. What did you have anything to compare that to, or is it was just one of those things that it just felt right, so you just kept pushing, as a young person kept pushing?
Yeah, I guess I don't really know. I'm not sure. Maybe my mom saw something,
Okay. And your mom was a gymnast?
My mom was not.
Okay.
She wasn't, but she put me in this. And I was at a club called Trampoline Town USA, which many people from Rockford were a part of this club. We had incredible talent. back then. We had Judy Ford on our team, who became Miss America.
Sure.
And we had Rob Bollinger, who ended up running the Cirque in Las Vegas.
Okay. Yeah.
And we had Ron Marriott, who was a bronze medalist in diving. So we really had an incredible amount of talent right there in one building. It's amazing when I think back on it.
Well, they talk about sometimes that idea that the outliers, and Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book about that, and sometimes there's an element of timing that when a certain amount, just a certain group of a pool of talent, they're in the same place at the same time, and then the right coaches are there. There's something about how then that momentum then pulls other individuals up as well. And I know for me,
definitely,
that was my experience with bodybuilding in the 80s. It was very much the same, a very similar type of thing.
Well, and we helped each other. That was probably one of the neatest things, is we helped each other. And when we would get to competitions, people would be like, oh, great, they're here, And that just gives you momentum, just makes you feel like I got this. Yeah, if other people are afraid, here we are, It's a great feeling.
Yeah. And I imagine, though, at least from what I remember of that, is that it's a great feeling of confidence and you're being pushed in the gym. But I know for me, there was an element of pressure to perform.
Yes.
So there's this tension between...
Well, what's interesting about that is there's levels now. There's novice, intermediate, advanced, sub-advanced. We didn't have that back then. It was everybody was the same level. They were divided by age group. So when I first started, I was competing against kids that had already been in the sport for a long time. So I probably got 30th out of 31 at my first couple competitions. And my mom taught me that as long as I do my best, that was good enough. So my focus was not on winning. It was on doing the best I could. And that made me really enjoy the sport. And then it was a long time before I won anything,
So there's this idea of continuous improvement.
Yes.
And that was really the mark in which you were being measured.
Yes. If my routines were harder than the meet before, and I accomplished them, I was successful. That's how I judged it. And I think, then it's just doing your personal best.
Right. Oh, yeah. And I think it makes... I think that's huge. That would be something that I would think that Nick Saban would would be saying something very similar about you being able to measure your own progress against yourself, knowing yourself well enough. Going back to that first stunt that you were trying to learn how to do.
Yes.
What was getting in the way was the thinking, right?
It was all the thinking. Yes.
And then once you experienced landing it, once you experienced doing it, then that thinking no longer...
It was gone. I moved on.
Yeah. And so that had to be a fundamental learning lesson at a very early age.
Yes.
Where you figured it out.
Yes.
By not avoiding it, but by pushing through it.
Definitely. And that right there is everything.
And having coaches and support, encouraging you through it. But at some point, ultimately, it was just having to... Yes.
And, the kids that walk into the gym now, it is the neatest thing to see them kind of look at it like, okay, what is this gymnastics? And they're carrying themselves a certain way. And after a while, you can see them hold their head up more. They even walk differently as they start to learn skills and develop their confidence. And then when they hit those struggles that, there are some days that I am sure that the kids that I teach would give their right arm not to come in and face what they know that they're going to have to face that day. To get to the next level, they have to work on that skill that they are so afraid of. And when they get through it, there is nothing like it, because you can't give a child self-esteem to that level, not the same as if they are stepping over that obstacle and getting through it. And to watch that, there's nothing like it.
Yeah. Well, we talk a lot about, and I know I've shared with you about the idea of the obstacle is the way, and that obstacle is not accidentally there.
Yes.
And what is the lesson? What's the opportunity to learn within that obstacle? So it is a matter of having to go through it.
Yeah.
Because it'll show up somewhere if you avoid it.
Yes.
It'll just show up in a different form.
Absolutely.
Right? Maybe it won't be in gymnastics. It'll be in something else.
Well, and it's the hardest thing also to help parents be able to handle it too, because it's very hard to watch your child struggle. And you want to protect them from any struggle that comes their way. But when you let the process work and they come in each day and face that, I wish I could describe adequately what happens to them, because I don't know, they're so proud of themselves.
Yeah.
And in a way that you couldn't give them. They have to do it themselves.
Right. Yeah, you can't wrap that up in a box and
exactly. I wish you could, but it doesn't happen that way.
That isn't how it works. So just a little bit more. I'm just interested because I just don't know, right? So for you said that you had an opportunity from an age standpoint to compete on an international level when you were 9,
yes.
right? And was that where you were saying that was your first win, or was that
no? I did not
qualified?
win. I placed 4th.
Okay.
But my mom had the neatest philosophy that made me also love the sport, where I went to everything. I was a kid that went to everything. She always thought that if I was in the environment, I would learn how to handle the environment. And so as long as I was a hard worker and did, the things that were expected of me, which I did, I went to everything, and I just knew that I would. Okay. And it made me love it. It made me want to work hard. It was very motivating to know that I was going to get to go, for lack of a better way of saying it, even though money was hard. We did not have money. And but my parents found a way to send me anyway. And I really think that changed the outcome of my career because I was a kid that went.
Gotcha. So you were exposed to that.
I was exposed to everything. And even one of the biggest examples is before I went to World Championships, the 2 years before, I was an alternate to the team. So I did not have to go. But my mom thought, if I go, I will understand it. I will watch the environment, I'll see what it is, and it will help me. And it did. I mean, just seeing all the different countries come in and watching them compete, it prepared me for the future.
That reminded me of, I remember when I was wrestling, and our coaches, even if we didn't qualify for the state tournament, they would still bring us down as a team with the individuals who did qualify, because they wanted us to experience what it was like to be in this large arena with this many people watching, and just to be able to experience something at just a completely another level.
I love that.
Yeah, and so, I didn't question it at the time. We just did it. But I remember that, and I remember later as a player, or even when I had won a national show as a bodybuilder, it was different being in that environment.
Yes.
The stage was different. The auditorium was different. The amount of people that were there.
And the level that you're watching. Yeah. You can easily mentally take yourself out before you even start if you pay attention to what they're doing and the level they're doing, which in gymnastics, I think it's really huge that you focus on yourself, like what you're going to do. Do the best job that you know how to do, and don't worry about what they're doing, because it won't be good for you.
Well, and it goes back to kind of what you were saying before, is that, before you did, what was it, a flip-flop? No.
Yes.
So before you did that first flip-flop, there was a belief that you could fall.
Yes.
And then after you did that, then there was a belief that that wasn't going to happen.
Exactly.
And it was all about the thinking, right?
Yes.
So I imagine you could easily, very similar, push too hard, get out of that flow, get into your head, be distracted. It could be the same way.
Exactly.
So,
Yep.
so when you were competing as an individual, you started very young. You competed up till what age did you compete till?
I competed until I was 16 or 17, and then I had an injury that stopped me. And I had already been to one World Championships, and I placed second to another American girl. And so the only other thing I had left to accomplish was go back and try to win. And when I had this injury, I had to make a decision, and I decided to, since there was no college scholarship having to do with tumbling, because I was more of a tumbler than a gymnast, I decided to go into coaching, and I walked into it. It was the most natural transition ever. And actually, I had already been coaching some, so I was coaching and an athlete at the same time. I was spending a lot of time in the gym. As a high schooler, my mom was like, "Don't you want to go do this?" I'm like, "No." So, because I loved it. It was my world. So, So anyway, but now, I mean, we definitely try to help the kids get scholarships, and yeah.
So let's talk just briefly about the experience of having this injury that at the time you may or may not have known that it was going to be that part of your career shifting.
Yes.
Or did you know? Was there a knowing? Was there a fear?
It was, it was pretty significant injury.
What was the injury?
It was, I tore my ACL.
Oh, okay.
And the doctors wouldn't guarantee, even if I had the surgery at that moment, because knee surgeries have come a long way, that I could return to the sport. And so I decided to go ahead. I loved coaching even then, and I knew everyone in the sport. When I went to the meets, it just, I don't know, it was just very natural. And
so what would you say, so this, again, going back to the idea of an obstacle happening, right? So you have this injury. In this particular case, where you tore your ACL, that was of a particular event, or a particular landing, or a particular thing that happened, right? And so it was sudden, and then in the midst of consulting with the doctors and contemplating about it, there was this move that, okay, this is going to be, I'm going to transition from competitor to coach. And even though you had already experienced some of that, what was it like moving from one to the other?
It was so natural. It's hard for me to explain. I am so goal oriented, and right away I had good kids coming up right behind me, and it was just neat to try to get them to max out their careers, I guess, try to get them to world championships, and because I knew what it took at the time. I knew what they needed to do, and I wanted to go after it with them,
So okay, with that, then you knew what it takes to go, because you had been there. Different times, and then it sounds like the top of it was when you got second. That was the as far as placement goes. That was the top of that. So what does it take to be in gymnastics, or anything you would say?
I would just say that the most important thing is perseverance. I mean, you have to push through when you don't want to. You have to do a lot of things in your training that you don't want to, but you do it because you know that it's what you need and what's good for you. And you can't give up too easy. You've got to go. you have to push, and you have to keep going. And there's days, because gymnastics takes a lot of time. There's days when you'd probably rather be doing something else, and you just have to go to practice anyway. And I think that the kids that push through, I've never had anyone say, "I'm sorry that I persevered." I mean, you're always proud. And so I would say that's, and then to get to even a higher level, you have to have some talent. I mean, you do have to have a talent for it. So I think that's very important too. But I think work ethic, and attendance and all of those things are really important.
Well, and I think, when we think about, it's hard, right? As a spectator, you see certain people you hear about them, you see them on TV or read about them or whatever. Simone, right?
She makes it look easy.
She makes it look pretty easy. But there's a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot of that is what I'm hearing you say, very similar to other sports, is that there are things that we can control. We can control if we show up.
Yes.
We can control what we do when we show up. We can control if we give 100% or give 95%.
Exactly.
We can control if we're going to face that fear.
Yep.
And get coaching tips on how to push through that fear. Those are all things that within our control. Mm-hmm. Now, there may be some individuals that are just more naturally gifted and have that same mindset too. That's going to be a different thing.
Yes.
They can be naturally gifted, have that mindset, and then, as you were talking about, be surrounded around another group of athletes at the same level, and that's just going to raise the bar. So there is timing, there is a talent factor that we can't necessarily control those.
Exactly.
But what we can control, and will get us pretty far.
Yes.
Are those factors of showing up, discipline, consistency.
Exactly. I really love coaching kids that no matter how hard it gets, I know they're going to show up the next day because I'm on a journey with them because they're going to hang in there. They're going to stick it out. I love that as a coach.
Yeah. So, tell us a little bit about, as you've been coaching, now you've been coaching
for 40 years.
40 years, okay. And so, and obviously the sport has changed.
Yes.
There's a lot of different variables that have gone into that, and there's probably been, peaks and valleys and different aspects of it. How would you, if there was, because it sounds like who you are as a coach has stayed consistent ever since you started coaching.
Yes.
But what have you seen that's changed in the sport over time? And obviously I'd say there's probably some good, some concerns.
Yeah. In the sport itself, I think the standard has just gotten higher and higher. And there's a lot of good coaches out there where I feel like it was maybe a little less before. I think the way, I'm trying to think of how to say this, but the way people raise their children is much different than it was when I first started.
Okay.
I think it's easier to just move on to something else now, I guess, than it did before. I think, people hung in there a little bit more when I first started. So I don't know.
well, okay. So let's explore, because again, I think anytime when we talk about certain elements of it, we're just talking, right?
Yes. Right.
So we're just talking. This is just our observations, and next thing you know, next week something's going to completely change that,
yes.
right?
Right.
So or we may have something that'll completely challenge that way of thinking, and we may start looking at it differently.
Yeah.
But when you talk about the idea that if there is because it's two components, right? So when you were 6 years old and you couldn't get that flip-flop, there may have been a consideration that you can get it, and out of frustration, you may have wanted to quit.
I never felt that way, and we never talked about it. Okay. So I don't know, that might be unusual. I think maybe other people thought, she should, find something else, but I never thought that, and I didn't want to.
Okay. So with that being said, then that may be even sometimes harder when you've had in the past teammates, and now you have other situations, because that wasn't necessarily your experience.
Yeah.
But I have had students that I've worked with when I was coaching football and wrestling and even in the strength conditioning coaching, is that when it started getting difficult, when the practices were at 6 a.m. and they were tired, there was I don't know if I want to do this anymore.
Yes. I think it's very hard to make a decision when you're tired. I usually try to encourage people not to make a decision quickly like that because it might not be the right one.
Right.
Yeah,
it may be overly influenced by that fatigue, or that illness or that injury or whatever it may be.
Yes.
So I think I agree with you. I think there needs to be a
time frame where you don't make a decision quickly and make sure that that's really what you want to do.
Yeah.
Because the next sport's going to be hard too.
Yes.
There's always going to be that struggle. You can't, it's just which struggle do you want?
Yeah. And if it isn't a sport, it might be that next thing.
Yes.
Maybe it's going to be education. Maybe it's going to be a relationship.
Well, that is what I love about gymnastics for the kids that I teach. I feel like they're going to be the best employees. I think that the life lessons they learn from gymnastics is they're going to take with them everywhere. The perseverance to get through college, just how they work. They know how to solve problems. That's another thing. I think that kids now, they don't play outside the way we used to.
Sure.
We would play outside and we would solve problems, and it's just a different world, kind of. But I watch the kids in the gym learn how to solve problems. And
what do you mean solve problems in the gym? What do you mean?
Well, when they're afraid of something, and we have to talk about that, I can't always solve it for them. They have to decide for themselves what they're going to do about this. So I encourage them to come and talk to me about what they need. Hey, Lori, could I have some more mats under the beam? Because I'm really afraid of this skill, and I think I can go if I have more mats under the beam. And then we just pull the mats out one by one until they're more confident. But I feel that, or could I have a spot on this? I just think that I always encourage them to help me solve the problem. We have to solve this together. I'm there for you, but you have to be willing to do it, So, they're smart, they know, they figure out what they need and they get through it.
Yeah. Well,
because they know not doing it's not an option,
right, Right.
We're going to do this, so how do you want to do this,
Well, and in encouraging them to work with you, encouraging them to dialogue with you, is such a huge element.
I want them to be able to come to me, and say, I'm really upset about this. It's really hard when they hide it, and I think that they're fine, but they're not fine.
Yeah.
So I try to make sure that they feel like they can come to me.
Sure. And it's interesting as you were talking about this idea of, we talked from the very beginning about what a culprit fear can do, and how much fear can be the obstacle.
It's not rational, it's completely not rational.
Yeah. And if you expose that fear to oxygen, right? We start talking about it. We talk it to the coach and they know that you're going to keep on pushing to figure out a way to push through it,
exactly.
Right? Versus telling their fear to someone who's going to say, well, avoidance is an option.
Exactly. I would try 100 different ways until you figure out what's going to work.
Right. And maybe this hasn't happened, but has there been individuals who've had concerns that they didn't want to disappoint you, so that they were afraid but didn't want to admit they were afraid?
Definitely that happens.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, tell us about how that...
I can tell by their mannerisms or how many turns they take. All of a sudden, I haven't seen this kid. I can tell she's avoiding it. Mm-hmm. So then I have to go and say, what's going on with this? Okay. I think you're avoiding this skill, and you need a lot of them. I always tell them you have to do the thing you don't want to do, and you have to do it a lot, because that's how you're going to get to the other side of it.
Yeah.
And usually at first they start catching themselves. Oh yeah, I'm doing that, and then they start to take more turns. And
sure. There is, as a social worker, there's an element of now especially, we talk all the time about mental illness, and we talk all the time about anxiety and differentiating anxiety versus fear.
Yes.
So fear is a normal part of life, right?
Yes.
But avoidance of fear isn't avoidance of the thing that's causing us to be afraid isn't necessarily mean that I'm going to be anxiety free.
Yeah.
It just means I go around trying to spend a lot of energy avoiding anything that I'm afraid of.
Well, and I think you rob yourself of being so proud when you do the things you didn't want to do, and then you got to the other side of it. I've had a couple of those experiences. One is because we travel all over the world with gymnastics and in tumbling, I didn't like to fly. And I didn't want to fly. And I had to deal with that, especially when my kids were little. I was so worried I had to get back home to them.
Sure.
And so it was, I really went really far, and I let that control me for a little bit. And then I decided that I did not want my kids to learn that fear. I didn't want them to see that. So I had to address it.
Sure.
And I went to talk to somebody who told me, Lori, you think you have more control on a daily basis than you do. And I realized I wasn't going to be here 1 minute longer than what God allowed me to be. So I decided, okay, God, here you go. I'm going to fly whenever I'm supposed to fly, and I'm putting you in control of what plane it is, what the date is, all those things. And once I made that decision, it changed everything, but I had to get there, and it took a little bit, but once I made that decision, then I moved forward, and I've been traveling a lot ever since.
Sure. Well, I think the key to what I heard you just say is that it was two parts, right? It was a mindset about going in and doing this, controlling what I can control and letting go of what I can't control.
Yes.
In your case, it was able to let go to a higher belief system, right?
Yes, I thought I was not being a very good example as a Christian because I wouldn't get on the plane. So that means I don't trust God there, but I trust Him over here, but I don't trust Him there. And I just did not think that was how I wanted to be.
Yeah, and I think that aspect of it, right? When we have a conscious contact with God, and we are striving to be congruent, we are going to be then faced with, am I going to be a hypocrite about this?
Yes.
Meaning not like I'm going to be lying to someone, but am I going to be congruent, consistent with my belief in? It's easy to be. It's easy to have confidence in God over here.
Yes.
And
when you're comfortable.
Yeah. But when I'm out of my comfort zone, am I going to follow when it's tough, or is it just going to follow when it's easy?
I was not proud of myself when I was doing that. I thought, this is not. I'm letting it control me. That's not a way to live.
Right. Again, going back to it's incongruent with what you believe in other aspects of your life.
Yes.
You overcame the fear of falling doing a flip-flop.
Yes.
At a young age, and having to now, for whatever reason, this idea of flying or the fear of falling once again, was coming up, and how were you going to address it? Because obviously you flew a lot when you were younger.
Exactly. Well, I had a bad flight that started the whole thing. And then when I had kids, I think it made it even bigger because I didn't really even want to leave them at all. And I definitely wanted to be able to get back to them. Yeah. So it was, I let it go way too far. And last year, I flew to New Zealand and Australia and climbed a bridge that I was scared to death to climb. And so if you put all that together, I flew, not being real comfortable with heights, and climbed that bridge. I was super proud,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, and I think, I remember when I had, and I know you remember this a couple years ago when I had my injury, and there was an element that then that injury happened as a result of a fall, and that there was a sensation that I would get when I'd be at the top of the stairs or I'd be getting ready to step down. That must have been, it was a part that was still a body memory of what had happened with this traumatic accident, right?
Yes.
And the only way that I was going to get through that and be more comfortable with that was continue exposure to stepping down, right? And 'cause I never had this sensation or feeling when I would walk upstairs or walk up something. It was only when I was going down, and so I remember that it was repetitive exposure walking stairs.
Exactly.
And
that got you over it.
Yeah, and I don't. It's sometimes it happens, but it's very, very far in between now when that happens. And I think there's an element of just continued exposure to that, because rationally I knew that I was safe, but my body was still responding to
Yes.
it. And there was this element of, it was a choice to avoid or to
Yes.
expose myself to that. So then I know that when we met, you had just started coming into the gym, but a different gym.
Yes.
You started coming to a fitness center.
Yes.
And what was the reason why you started working out? I mean, obviously you're exposed to gymnastics all the time. You're consistently, I mean, when you came in, you were in good shape. So,
well, I started working out more because my kids had moved out, and I needed something to do, outside the gym.
Okay.
And I loved it right away.
Okay.
It was a really good outlet.
Sure. Okay. And so I know, having known you, that's how we met, was through the gym. You had another surgery just recently.
Yes.
Or not just recently.
When you were talking about the stairs, I could really relate to that.
Yeah. So how long ago was that surgery?
That was 5 months ago.
Okay. And what was it again?
And I had a knee replacement.
Knee replacement.
And it was because of the injury I talked to you about earlier that I never really got it fixed.
Okay.
And then I just went ahead and waited until it was time for a knee replacement. And it was fantastic.
So thinking, and I know that you had a larger goal with that,
Yes.
that you were going to get the knee replacement done, but your larger goal was that you were going to be able to be at least either fully recovered or pretty close to fully recovered, because you had a goal at the end. You had a trip you were going down.
Oh, yes. I was going to Italy, and that was for gymnastics as well. We had an Italian team that had visited us last summer, and we went to visit them, and we did the thing where they stayed in homes, and then we went there and stayed in homes, and it was an amazing trip, but I needed my knee to be good enough so I could go.
Sure. So well, two things I want to ask about that. I want to definitely ask about that type of program and what are some of the things that you learned from that. But then tell me about going through that knee surgery. What things did you learn going through that, and not only the surgery but the rehab of that? What did you learn about Lori, and that you wouldn't have known?
Well,
if you
I
wouldn't
thought
have
it was going to be a sprint, and it wasn't. It was a marathon. It was a lot of hard work. The rehab is a lot of work, but I was required to do it twice a week, and I did it 6 days a week, and I feel 100%. I don't know if I am 100%, but I feel like I am.
Sure.
So I think, as in everything, you get out of it what you put into it.
Right.
So
as you were going through that, one, you thought it was going to take less time to do it. You thought.
Yes.
And I think there is this idea. I know for me, I thought there was an element to that, maybe a little bit different, because mine was as a result of an accident that immediately happened, and I wouldn't have been able to walk at all under the circumstance. But there's this idea that the surgery itself is going to fix it.
Yeah.
And
I was scared to death of the surgery itself as well. I was very afraid of that.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I think it's because I waited so long, maybe.
Okay.
And
Afraid of what would happen in the surgery, or afraid of what?
I think I was just afraid of the surgery itself.
Okay.
And I was unsure about the outcome. I think I underestimated how much it was really going to do for me.
Okay.
And everything about it surpassed my expectation. I just remember the first month I thought, this is harder than I expected. But I'm here. I have to do it. It's not like I have a choice. So,
well, at that point, it's already done, right? It's already happened.
Yes.
And maybe there's some beauty to that idea that you didn't know how hard it was going to be until you were in it, and now what are you gonna do with it?
It's right.
How much do you think? Being a former athlete, being a coach, living it, still living it, even though you're not competing. How much do you think that played a part in the rehabilitation, your mindset for the rehabilitation?
I think it makes a difference in every single thing that we do. I mean, I think being an athlete makes you tough enough to handle the things that come your way. I think it makes you. I think it's just a completely different mindset. I don't know. I love to work hard, and I like the results of what happens when you work hard. I like the discipline of, I think a lot of things come from discipline. The way you spend money, showing up for class in college, whether you feel like it or not, and you have this new freedom. I think discipline is the key to being successful in so many ways.
Sure. I know for me that has been definitely a big part of that secret sauce of being able to be able to have knowing that I can have experience with being disciplined has been huge.
Yes.
Now, with that being said, I know for me, and I don't know if you can relate to this, but I've had to also be able to balance that discipline and work to pausing and being open to God guiding me, because I think, again, living in that tension of creativity comes in that space when I'm contemplating, not necessarily doing.
Yes.
But I have to do, if I want that, whatever that idea is, for that to come to life, there is an element of action that has to happen. So you can't always stay in this contemplative state of just creating and thinking. But I don't necessarily come up with anything new or creative if I'm just constantly doing.
Yes, that's true.
So I'm interested in hearing, because I know you've told me stories about this before, and more about when it was actually happening. But you, in now that you have the gymnastic academy, so you moved from athlete or competitor to a coach, and now you and your husband are business owners of Rockford Gymnastic Academy.
Yes.
And so you have not only competitive teams, but then you have a business and a space in which people are coming. And they could be just coming for an activity, coming for just preparation for another sport they're getting, or all the way to the end of international competitions, right?
We're meeting a lot of different needs, that's for sure.
And so how did that all come about? How did you go from now coaching to business owner? How did that?
Well, my mom started the Gymnastic Academy 42 years ago.
Okay.
Because there was no gymnastics in Rockford. And I had wanted to do gymnastics, but I was a power tumbler. So the problem with that was I could do very high skills on floor, but very low skills on beam and bars. And it was a little bit too late for me. But she started the Gymnastic Academy, and 1 year later, somebody set our building on fire, which was an arson fire. And in my mom's style, she made the best of it. Christian Life School was kind enough to let us use their gym for the summer so we could get back on our feet. Okay. And the Nissen Corporation had sent us equipment, and we were back up and rolling in 2 weeks. Wow. And then by the end of the summer, we had a bigger building that was even better for us. Okay. And we moved to several different locations. And at the main location that we have now on Springbrook, my parents had bought that property so that they could put the gym on it, and it was kind of out in the country then. It's not now. And then my mom decided to retire and spend more time with my dad. So my husband and I actually moved back here because I had lived in Utah for a year. My husband had his own club out there, and we came back to run the business.
Okay.
And my husband is a fantastic visionary, and he just definitely sees the direction that the business needs to go, kind of ahead of when he just always sees where things are going. I'm very much the detail person.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Gotcha. So you said he had a club out in Utah.
Yes.
What's your husband's first name?
Jim.
Jim. So what kind of club did he have out in Utah?
He had a trampoline and tumbling club.
Okay.
That he had started at a young age.
Oh, okay.
And that one was very successful, and we were competitors, so but yes, my mom wanted to retire and spend more time with my dad, and so it was kind of a natural move.
Natural transition.
Yes.
Okay.
And since then we have 3 locations now.
Okay. So you have the main one on Springbrook.
Yes, right? And that's our competitive gym.
Okay.
And then we have the trampoline park by the mall.
Oh, okay.
And then we have one up north in Roscoe.
Okay. Gotcha. So, so when you talk about, and obviously you serve a variety of different, it serves many different purposes, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And never knowing, right, where that may open up the door for someone to come in and get involved with the competitive part, but it may just be the idea of movement.
Yes.
And just getting
and
involved.
Even at a really early age, it's so good for their coordination. And I think that it helps develop what they need to be better athletes, even if they end up diving or doing another sport. I think that gymnastics is always helpful for body awareness, especially.
Sure. So I can see, obviously tons of different benefits from that. I'm going to jump back to what you were saying earlier with the international students and some of the things that with this, that you've been able to be exposed to and some of your athletes be exposed to. So you're exposed to different cultures. And so, yeah.
Which is so amazing.
Yeah.
My mom always said, when in Rome, we always tried the food at different countries and just learned as much as we could. It's really incredible if you can stay in homes and really see how they live, and yeah, it's amazing. We've done it in the past too with South Africans. We had them. They came here and we went there, and yeah, seeing different countries is incredible.
When you thinking back, and how long have you guys been doing kind of the work with the international teams, and them, you train over there and then they train here?
Almost right away. The Gymnastic Academy opened in 1977, and my World Championships was 1978, so almost from the beginning. Okay.
And that would be when other athletes would come here, you mean?
And that was in 1982 was the first time we did that, where we had an exchange where other athletes came here, and then we went and stayed in homes there.
I see. Okay. And so...
but we've met the neatest people.
Yeah,
really, truly amazing people.
And particular stories?
And now that we, now that you have Facebook, you can actually still keep in touch. I still keep in touch with people that I used to be a huge letter writer, and I would love just receiving letters in the mail and, writing back and forth to all of the athletes that I met. These people were my world.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
And they're still amazing people. I still keep in touch with them, even the ones overseas. In fact, we had an interpreter one time in Bulgaria in 1983, and we still keep in touch with her. And she's still trying to get us to come back there and, maybe stay with her, or, and these Italian gymnasts, they actually are from Sicily, and we stayed in their homes, and I can't even describe to you how they treated us. They wouldn't let us pay for a meal, and they treated our girls like rock stars, because we're a little ahead of where they are gymnastically, and they just think that these girls are their American dream,
So I'm just thinking on a handful of different ways, right? So one way that you and your husband have, and your mom started off, obviously, putting Rockford on the international gymnastic map was starting this athlete exchange, right?
Yes.
And just bringing people into Rockford, from other locations, and then vice versa, right?
Yes.
And of course, no one ever knows that. We never hear about those types of things. But that's huge, right?
Yes.
And
the World Age Group competition was actually in Rockford in 1982.
Oh, was it really?
Yes,
okay.
at the Metro Center.
Interesting. Interesting. And I think just forming those relationships, as you already mentioned, that you still keep in contact with some of them.
Yes.
When you think about something that stood out to you, a memory, an interaction that kind of stands out to you about the benefit of being able to step out of your comfort zone, meaning meeting people from not only another country, but when it's all said and done, a competitor.
Yeah. I think that the experience that I remember the most is I loved trying to communicate with them when we didn't speak the same language. That was really fun. We used to trade pins and jackets, warm-up jackets and things. And since then, there's a coach in Chicago that was on the Russian team. And we were like, oh, there's the Russians. It was just so amazing. There they are, and they're so good. And but they couldn't talk to us because it was still behind the Iron Curtain and they weren't allowed. They didn't want anyone to defect. And when I've talked to this coach now and I said, oh, we just loved when you came, and she goes, well, I was sad because we couldn't talk to you. And I thought how interesting that I didn't know how they felt. I just was in awe of them, but I think just trading things and being able to take something home from, what belonged to them, it was just awesome.
Yeah. Well, I know I mentioned to you a few months ago that this idea that we came up with about how to raise awareness and provide solutions for people when they get stuck in that darkness that leads to suicide, and how we believe that not only the arts and different forms of the art, but athletics can provide a way out of that darkness.
Yes, for sure.
And I think some of the stories that you talked about today and what you've created in your space and through your example, and obviously the other coaches that are there, is a great example. As a therapist, we work with certain parts of helping people struggle through and wrestle with the anxiety, the depression. Sometimes it's chemical, sometimes it's a result of an event, but ultimately it comes down to a lifestyle.
Yes.
You're never going to get over a fear of heights by talking about it. You have to figure it. Yeah, you have to expose yourself to it. You have to, kind of like that flip-flop, right?
Yes.
Kind of like you've been talking this whole time, is a belief system that is incorporated by a lifestyle.
Well, you're also making me think of sometimes when the athletes are not feeling proud of themselves and they're, just overwhelmed by whatever they're afraid of, or a lot of times they just think that's what we think too, that they're telling themselves how bad they're doing, and they think that we think that, but we don't.
Right.
So I think sometimes other people think a certain thing about them or what they're going through, but they don't think that. Yeah. And that can be very negative, I guess, for lack of a better word. Very negative, but it's not even true, really.
Right. Yeah. And I think being able to have a space where they can talk and dialogue about it allows that, because our perception is our reality.
Yes.
But through a dialogue, through exposure to something, maybe we can shift that perception, and then consequently the reality changes.
Yes.
So I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit.
Okay.
So, and again, we're just talking, so it's no big deal. But two things. One, if you were going to speak to any parents that are listening about, in this case, coming to the club,
yes.
Regardless of where they're at on the continuum, either competing or just taking lessons, what would you encourage the parents to think about when they come in and when they're dropping off this?
You mean like what they're going to get out of it? Or
not only what they're going to get out of it, but how can they best help you and the other coaches to help their child?
Well, what I ask of my parents is really difficult, because I think that they should drop them off and not watch as much as they would want to. Because even if a parent is just kind of sitting there reading a book, the child still thinks that they can do something for them when things get uncomfortable. And I want to develop a relationship with the child so that we can work through those tough times together. And it's hard to do when the parents are there. And sometimes also, as a parent, it is very difficult not to interject what you think. And it can get in the way of, because kids can only listen to so much, They can't listen to our corrections and their parents' corrections. And I think it's very difficult to be the parent of an athlete, It's hard to let that go. Sure. So that would at least be one of the things. I think if they're only there for recreational, I probably wouldn't go that far, Sure. But I think let them struggle. Let them struggle more than you want, especially when you have a good coaching staff that's going to be there for them. Let them bring them, on those tough days, and so that we can help them get through that problem so that they can be really proud.
So the struggle's not a bad thing. It's
not a bad thing. Yeah. It's hard to watch, but it's not a bad thing. And you know what? I want to rescue them too. Sure. But I can't either, but I can be there, and we are there. And my coaching staff is amazing too. I mean, they want what's best for the kids.
So the struggle is part of the thing.
It is part of, you cannot become a Simone Biles without struggle. She has struggled, even though she makes it look easy.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So, so paraphrasing that, if they come to you and they bring their child to you, there's an element that you're asking them to trust the process.
Yes.
There's an aspect that you're asking them to step away so that as their child is digging for gold,
yes,
it's really within themselves, for them not to be there during the details of the digging, but
yes,
have them bring the gold to you, yes, after a practice or at a meet or whatever it is.
Yes, so. Because if you rescue them, they can't get through it.
Yeah.
There's
no gold.
There's no gold.
Yeah.
That's right.
No gold. Just
That's a great way to put it.
So, and if you were going to say anything to a particular, now again, recognizing that this may not be geared toward grade school kids listening, but if you were going to say something to someone who either was going to get involved with gymnastics or get involved with anything, maybe it's going to the gym for the first time, maybe it's doing some other type of activity they haven't done, what would you say to them?
Well, I guess I'm not sure what their goal would be. I would say give it a chance. Hang in there and give whatever you set out to do, give it a little bit of time so that you can, give it a chance,
right,
to make it.
Sure.
Yeah, don't give up just because it got hard in the beginning.
You're there for a reason, right? They pick whatever that is for a reason.
Yes.
And if we don't give it a given amount of time,
yes,
3 months, 6 months, a year, and work hard through that,
exactly,
push hard, but we don't really know.
Because you're going to be uncomfortable at first. And if you give up just because you're uncomfortable, then you're going to miss the blessings on the other side. Yeah. Lori,
thank you very much for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, I always enjoy the conversations we have at the gym, and definitely enjoyed having a longer amount of time to talk today. So again, thank you for what you do at Rockford Gymnastic Academy, and then obviously thank you for what you're doing for Rockford with and for the people that are here. So
thank you so much.
Yep. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. As Lori not only shared her experiences as an athlete, but then as that morphed into being a coach and a business owner, but more importantly, the lessons that she's learned throughout her life, but what she's trying to share and what she's sharing with her coaches as well as the athletes that come to her. Again, thank you for being with us today, and I look forward to being with you next week.